A tree stands outside the office window. It has borne witness to it all. Entrenched its roots in horror, danced curtly into corpse-fertilized soil. It has greened like rotted bread, its bark calloused by the callous acts it has seen. Its stature is self-aggrandizing, growing tall on stolen land. Not even the sun's embrace can grant it dignity, not even the sky's roof can shelter it from its own evasions. This tree has witnessed graves dug preemptively, yet it has grown shamelessly. It has seen hopes and dreams trampled underfoot, suffocated by the very earth they were buried in. It has watched shoes stomped down on former graves, carcasses rotting into soil, leaving behind only saplings as survivors. It has aged, so it has witnessed. It survived, so it attests. It rectifies simply by virtue of being. It offers itself by existing to the memory of those who can no longer. And yet, it has stood still. Rooted itself deeper, grown taller, leached nutrients from the very soil that has built it. What allows this to continue is a profound numbness, a numbness too visceral to compel. My family lives, by virtue of both tragedy and ironic luck, in Shutovo, a small coastal town which is roughly 60 kilometers from Gdańsk and 45 from the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad or Królewec or Königsberg, depending on who you ask. It is in many ways a crossroads of modern European history. The crossfires of modern conflict and atrocity converge on a serene, innocuous Baltic beach. Every summer I bask in the simple joys of rural life in Shutovo, watching the sun pierce through the trees, watching kids drunk on summer camp bliss, and eating from greedy fish stands. And yet, from September 2nd, 1939 to the 9th of May 1945, Shutovo was the site of the first and longest-running German Nazi concentration camp, Karl-Stutthof. At Stutthof, I pored over video files of its last survivors. I heard horrors I will never forget, which I cannot bear to recount. I was gifted a rare proximity to history. I wrote those words down with painstaking devotion and guilty dissonance as I felt each key prick my fingers, as I walked the steps of evil, as I inhaled the air of criminality. The woods that took me from my grandmother's home to the museum had seen the ultimate subordination of human life. It had seen bloody tree sap pouring out its golden veil of innocence. And yet, I must say there was incredible fulfillment in work that afforded you the satisfaction of sentencing evil to the halls of eternal shame in its former office. In work which allowed you to preserve a fleeting memory which begged never again. Every history has more than one thread, each thread a story of division. I've never known one home. I've scrapped together an identity out of guilt, out of migration, out of displacement. These scraps exist in painful tension, and perhaps my German passport has stamped me with a silent, pervasive shame, seeping out like the dark ink of its stamps. We have laid the shorthand of victims upon them, yet this, make no mistake, ultimately betrays their personhood, because it perpetuates the same delineation between you and I, and them, the hegemonic mass of suffering. That's why today I'll try to focus on single stories. The survivor whose story I transcribed at Stutthof was Sauvay France. He spent the 1930s working for the first ever marine scuba divers, rushing eagerly towards the very lowest depths humanity could reach. Soon he would discover those depths, though far from the sea. In 1939, he began building the structures that would soon encamp him. First, the forest was cleared, with soon familiar impunity. It is a great myth that there is power in numbers, because there is no power in numbers when they are reduced to just that. Power is the means through which we attempt to explain our human capacity to, and indeed, unfortunate tendency towards, perverse violence. Because if absolute power corrupts absolutely, then surely we can shield ourselves from the banality of evil. Hannah Arendt, in The Origins of Totalitarianism, posits that totalitarian movements harvest legitimacy from claims to historical forces which trump all, including the sanctity of human life. Maybe then, in this context, numbers are powerful even when, or perhaps because, they are just that. I had struggled with revealing the graphics of what I had heard. I had attempted to insulate myself from the weight of the words, to absorb without analyzing, to analyze without feeling. Yet, when history's ghosts begin to speak in the voices of the present, when the cadence of past horrors resurfaces in modern discourse, such delusions become quickly untenable. I'd assumed that I would lose hope. I'd assumed that hope could not survive in a place like Château. And yet, hope is beautifully stubborn. This card was made by an unknown prisoner named Czesław and sent from the camp to his wife. On the front is a watercolor drawing of a heart pierced by barbed wire. On the back, a dedication. To my beloved Lucia, with heartfelt greetings from the camp, Czesław, December 13th, 1944. The museum notes, love had many faces in the camp. For some, it was a luxury, accessible only to those in privileged positions who could give their loved ones a piece of bread. For others, it was a painful burden, because to love meant to fear for someone else more than for oneself. There were those who saw love as a source of hope, those who risked their lives to exchange even a single word with their beloved or to smuggle secret letters. It was not the love we know today. Sometimes it was hope, sometimes it was an escape from reality, and sometimes it was the only proof that a person remained human in inhuman conditions. While imprisoned in the camp, Halina Banasiak, prisoner number 37323, wrote poetry and fairy tales for her 3 children, which was illustrated by fellow prisoners in the camp. Their memoirs of Anna Paszkowska describe her as such. She was anxious about the fate of her husband and children, filled with longing for them. She found solace in 2 ways. She wrote poetry and fairy tales for her children, which were read in the evenings with deep emotions, and she devoted herself to helping others with extraordinary selflessness. She smuggled clothing into the men's section, shared her food rations with the starving, and volunteered as a nurse in the camp hospital, working night shifts invaluable to the sick who longed for her care. She taught Polish before the war and later joined the resistance in the Home Army. In 1944, she was imprisoned by the Gestapo and sent to Château as a political prisoner. In the camp, she took part in secret education and care for the sick. In January 1945, when the prisoners were forced on a death march, she chose to stay behind to care for those suffering from typhus. She was eventually evacuated by sea in April 1945, but died of typhus in a hospital in Sweden in the same year. She never saw her children again. Love and hope remained at Château because to submit to cynicism was to give up, to refuse to let one's soul survive. I'd assumed that I would lose hope. I'd assumed that hope was simply not something that could survive in a place like Château. Yet, hope persists in the worst circumstances. We owe it then to those who have kept faith and hope to remain hopeful today, and unconditionally so. I'd assumed that such stark exposure to these political failures would breed within me a deep cynicism towards these institutions. After all, if the systems could not prevent tyranny, what fate could remain in their ability to uphold any semblance of justice today? Yet, when innate cynicism is high, societies begin to veer away from the principles of liberty. In such times, those who seek to undermine democratic ideals find fertile ground. Fascist actors gash their ivory towers, seizing power by assuaging civil rage and soothing desperation. When people feel they have nothing left to lose, they are more easily manipulated, more susceptible to the false promises of those who offer them any semblance of order, even at the cost of freedom. The cynicism is ripe for plunder. Because when trust in a system has eroded, it leaves a vacuum that demagogues can easily fill, offering simple solutions to complex problems. In such a climate, democracy is but a relic of a time when hope had a place in politics. Though, perhaps counterintuitively, this experience has sparked within me a naive yet unwavering optimism, a drive to disprove the notion that cycles of tyranny are inevitable. Because, if power must continuously justify itself, then tyranny, by its very nature, cannot endure. This is not just a hope, but a fundamental belief of mine. The rise of populist extremism is far from predetermined. We often hear that populism and extremism are the inevitable responses to dissatisfaction, disillusionment, or disenchantment. But I believe we have the power to prove otherwise. When we address the underlying issues that fuel discontent, we give people a reason to hope, something far more compelling than the false promises of demagogues. Tyranny can only thrive in the absence of hope, in a system that is no longer accountable to the people it serves. Then, those who offer nothing more than snake oil cannot thrive, because while the rhetoric may seduce for a moment, it will not endure if the system is responsive, if the institutions are strong, and if the public is engaged. Despite its brutality, history decisively trends towards freedom and justice. This is a characteristic fact of modern history. And this progress, though fraught with setbacks, with war, with suffering, shows us that freedom is not an abstract ideal. It is a reality that has been fought for, negotiated for, and won time and time again. History refracts through the lens of human resilience and the unrelenting pursuit of dignity. While we may see waves of authoritarianism, we also see their counterforce, movements of resistance that continue to push society forward. The tragedies of the past, however painful, become the foundations upon which our greater ideals are built. It is a beautiful testament to the promise of peace that I'm able to speak here today, given my background. Perhaps it corroborates some of my admittedly naive idealism. It is also a rather poetic, ironic resistance to the tyranny which is trying to make such a story unthinkable. I stand here today because history has allowed me to, because enough people, some whose names I will never know, chose to resist rather than to despair. But I also stand here today as a contradiction. I'm German and Polish. I carry in my name, in my passports, in my very being, a weight of a history that does not sit easily. For some, that history is one of shame. For others, it is one of suffering. For me, it's a responsibility. Because to be Polish is to inherit the scars of occupation, of displacement, of resilience. And to be German is to inherit the burden of what was done in the name of my nationality. I cannot change either history, but I can choose how I remember it. The tree outside the window does not remember, but I will because I must. Not just to honor the past, but to prove that history is not destiny, that history refracts, that who we have been does not have to define who we must become, that no matter how deep the roots of injustice run, we still have the power to uproot them. Thank you.